Historian Oswald Spengler's unique vision of history predicted a great turning point for Western civilization, one that all great cultures undergo. He believed that we live in the most trying times known to history of a great culture. Many of his predictions have come true in the past century, while a major one, the rise of a Caesar-like figure, still looms on the horizon and will supposedly play out soon. An introduction to Spengler's philosophy of history. Oswald Spengler is best known for his work Decline of the West, published in two parts, one in 1919 and the second in 1923. A German schoolmaster turned reclusive scholar, Spengler presented a unique vision of history that predicted the rise and fall of civilizations. His work became an instant success upon publication, selling 100,000 copies by 1926, as its philosophy, depicting Western culture as a tired civilization amidst decline, resonated with many Germans looking to make sense of their predicament after World War I. Spengler believed his new philosophy of history was so groundbreaking as to be compared with the Copernican revolution, the realization that it was the sun and not the earth at the center of the solar system. So what made his philosophy so revolutionary? Spengler's philosophy was based off two main assumptions. Number one, cultures are the basic unit of history, not epochs or historical periods. And number two, cultures are akin to living organisms. They each have a predetermined life cycle. Spengler rejected the linear, ancient, medieval, modern view of history, instead advocating for a more cyclical understanding focused on structure and form. Central to his philosophy was the idea of morphology, a term borrowed from biology dealing with the structure of organisms. He adopted this concept from Goethe, who was a major influence. In some ways, Spengler was a cultural relativist. He did not believe any culture was inherently better or worse than others. And the history of mankind was not a series of developments that progressed humanity towards some ultimate aim. Rather, in his words, mankind has no aim, no idea, no plan, any more than the family of butterflies or orchids. In place of that empty figment of one linear history which can only be kept up by shutting one's eyes to the overwhelming multitude of the facts, the drama of a number of mighty cultures, each springing with primitive strength from the soil of a mother region, to which it remains firmly bound throughout its whole life cycle, each stamping its material, its mankind, in its own image, each having its own idea, its own passions, its own life, will and feeling, its own death. More succinctly, Spengler writes, cultures are organisms, and world history is their collective biography. Each culture goes through its own life cycle, which typically lasts about 1,000 years before declining, where it undergoes its childhood, youth, manhood, and old age. He also compared the life cycles of cultures to seasons. Cultures emerge during springtime, enjoy a blissful summer, begin to show signs of self-doubt during autumn, and finally succumb to winter, where they freeze or stagnate. This final winter stage is civilization, where a youthful culture is constantly evolving. A culture in its civilization phase is simply expanding outward, but not changing. Civilizations are no longer innovative or imaginative, but stale and fossilized. Cultures during springtime are things becoming, while civilizations are things become. Just as an old man is the destiny of a young man, civilization is the destiny of each culture. Spengler used the classical culture as an example. The creative, inspired Greek society eventually gave way to the practical, calculating Roman civilization, which spread to the ends of the known world. A cold, pragmatic mindset replaces a visionary one as a civilization expands. This mindset shift is best embodied by the juxtaposition of city dwellers who make up the civilization versus rural-born true types who comprise a growing spring and summertime culture. Spengler asserted that civilizations are marked by the prevalence of massive world cities, which give rise to a people who are rootless, clever, unfruitful, and contemptuous of their rural counterparts. Spengler identified 8 world-significant or high cultures that have fulfilled, or were in the process of fulfilling, their life cycle. They are the Babylonian, Egyptian, Indic, Cynic, Mesoamerican, Classical or Apollonian, Arabian or Magian, and finally Western or Faustian. It's notable that the classical culture comprises both Greek and Roman societies. Though often viewed separately today, Spengler highlighted their continuity. Cultures, as Spengler understood them, were larger than single nations or empires. Additionally, the classical and Western cultures are distinct. Though they share philosophical and technological foundations, Spengler claimed they were different cultures because they had different unique souls, or destiny ideas. It's here that Spengler's philosophy begins to blur the lines between historical analysis and metaphysical reflection. Not only did Spengler posit cultures evolved like organisms, he also believed they had souls. Though mankind as a whole does not have an aim, individual cultures have distinct inward potentials which drive their ultimate destiny. Cultures reveal their souls through architecture, mathematics, myths, and artwork. The great symphonies of the Western composers, Greek sculptures, and Arabic domed mosques are all manifestations of their respective souls. And every high culture has a prime symbol, a simple geometric or spatial shape that represents a culture's soul. Prime symbols informed every facet of a culture. A culture, no matter how hard it may try, cannot escape its prime symbol because it represents the fundamental worldview of said culture. To illustrate, the prime symbol of Western or Faustian culture is infinite space. Thus its art, science, architecture, and even mathematics are informed by this singular concept, the pursuit of infinity. In architecture, this took the form of the cavernous interiors, spires toward heaven, and stained glass windows that captured light itself, of medieval Gothic cathedrals. In art, oil paintings of the Renaissance and Baroque periods attempted to create a depth experience, focusing on landscapes and horizons, while Gregorian chants of the medieval period filled monasteries and churches with pure, ethereal sound. And symphonies of the 18th century became the pinnacle of Western art, encapsulating infinity like no other. Other cultures have had their own prime symbols. Classical culture had the concrete body, Egyptian the narrow corridor, Cynic the wandering path, and Arabic the dome. Though culture souls are unique, the overall structures of cultures are remarkably similar. In fact, understanding where a culture is in its life cycle means one can forecast its future. Spengler's morphological view of history was therefore predictive. Thus, a main thesis of Decline of the West is to use Spengler's framework to predict where Western culture is ultimately headed. As the title suggests, Spengler envisioned that Western culture was reaching fulfillment. Notably, he predicted that it nears its final stage, called Caesarism. Spengler believed a charismatic figure like Cesar inevitably emerges when the expansion of a civilization reaches its height, while the arts and sciences fail to create anything new. Caesarism signals the end of a civilization. In the classical culture, for example, its civilization stage began around the time of Alexander's conquest and finally culminated in the rise of Julius Caesar, where Caesarism gets its name. Spengler believed the rise of a Caesar figure was inevitable once a civilization's expansion has reached unmanageable levels, creating problems internally and from external foes. The way from Alexander to Caesar is unambiguous and unavoidable, and the strongest nation of any and every culture, consciously or unconsciously, willing or unwilling, has had to tread it. From the rigor of these facts, there is no refuge. So why did he believe the West was now approaching Caesarism? A few symptoms forebode the rise of Caesarism. A battling society of nations, where the size and scale of warfare increases, an accelerating demolition of ancient forms, a forsaking of old traditions and institutions, and finally, dictatorial money economics, which uses democracy as a weapon. Every civilization headed towards Caesarism is marked by massive wars not yet seen on a scale since that culture's inception. For the West, the Napoleonic Wars, which engulfed all of Europe and introduced the possibility of continental domination, set off this period. The American Civil War, then the First World War, continued this trend, and Spengler predicted more large wars to come during the next century. He was of course quickly proven right with World War II, and then the Cold War, which set continent-sized adversaries against each other. At the same time as seemingly endless warfare, the civilization begins unburdening itself of traditions, norms, and long-held institutions. In the classical culture, this began circa 450 BC, around the time of Socrates, who famously questioned the foundations of Athenian society. In Western civilization, Spengler saw the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries as this same phenomenon. Once this questioning and ultimately destabilizing attitude appears in a culture, Caesarism suddenly outlines itself on the horizon. Another signal of Caesarism's imminence is the rise of money's influence throughout society. Spengler said that democracy is the political weapon of money, and the media are the means through which money operates a democratic political system. Money, not birthright or meritocracy, becomes the deciding factor in determining the course of the civilization. Those with the most money make the laws themselves in their interests, and to that end they make use of the tool that they have made for themselves, democracy. Here, democracy is simply the bought and paid for mechanism of the moneyed class. Since money controls media, lawmakers, and institutions, the oligarchs can also manipulate the people into supporting their interests. Spengler therefore pins democracy as the will of the subsidized party. Once again using the classical culture as an example, Spengler juxtaposes ancient Greece and Rome. One can understand Greek society without ever discussing money, but in Rome's late republic or empire phases, it is impossible to comprehend the political struggles and historical turning points without first following the money. Cash dominates every facet of life in late civilizations. Caesarism is thus a reaction against this system, where raw political or even physical power is wielded to subdue this dictature of money. To some, the Caesar figure comes as a liberator against the status quo. Spengler writes, "The coming of Caesarism breaks the dictature of money and its political weapon, democracy. After a long triumph of world city economy and its interests over political creative force, the political side of life manifests itself, after all, as the stronger of the two. The sword is victorious over the money. The master will subdues again the plunderer will." And Spengler concisely sums up the tension between the moneyed interests and the Caesar figure, who uses force to accomplish his goal. Money is overthrown and abolished only by blood. Spengler believed all these signs were being realized during his own time, and predicted that the next Caesar figure would arise in the next century, placing him sometime around the 2020s. This makes Spengler's work especially intriguing, as some question whether the next Caesar figure has already arrived. Though he is often viewed as overly deterministic, Spengler did not think his philosophy was a reason to abdicate one's responsibility. Rather, one must accept the state of things and strive to live well during difficult times. Spengler writes, "The alternatives now are to stand fast or go under. There is no middle course. It falls to us to live in the most trying times known to history of a great culture." Decline of the West remains one of the most intriguing and perspective-shifting visions yet put forth as a philosophy of history. Many of Spengler's predictions have come to fruition, but soon, if his philosophy proves true, Western civilization will be confronted with these trying times. The question remains, how will we react?